Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
Welcome back, Jessica. You look amazing. You look like you had the most refreshing summer.
That is so sweet of you. And I absolutely did not.
Oh,
So it's all smoke and mirrors. And I worked like an animal all summer. And I am just so happy to see you.
It's good to see you
this
too.
is like my respite.
I gotta say, I had portions of my summer that were slotted for vacation. And at best, they were vacation-ish.
They were mildly less intense than the other times.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that. It was intense, but it wasn't in the city.
Okay.
So that's a bit of fresh air. It's a change of climate. It's, the change of atmosphere, the change of
Perspective.
it helped with the perspective. Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
that is wonderful. This will make you laugh. I don't think you know this yet. On the 15th, I leave New York. I live New York City. Yes, I do. I leave New York for Las Vegas.
Wait, the 15th of this month?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We need to look at our calendar.
Yes, I have to go to Las Vegas in a journalistic capacity.
Well, that Vegas is awesome and hot.
It's very hot. I'm very fortunate that I have a dear, dear friend who I'm going to stay with who has the most sumptuous house. So that's really nice. But the idea, and I've been to Las Vegas many times. For those of our listeners who live there, this is not personal. It's just not my kind of place. So I was like, this is really my first getting out of the city, and I'm going to Vegas. So
let's do some research and find cool little oases.
You know what? You and I need to go back to Hudson.
Yeah.
For that little Airbnb that we did.
Yes, that was so nice.
We need a creative retreat together.
In the fall. I love
We're gonna vibe.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so happy to see you. And you were so generous. I didn't have a chance to say, not only do you look fabulous, but you're serving some very serious 1940s today.
Ooh.
And you even have like a barrel curl over one shoulder and some ruching on that dress. Meg, you looking fine.
My engagement question for you, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, by the way, this is episode 114.
What?
I know. That's who we are.
It's who we are now.
I know. We are podcasters.
Yeah. And if anyone who's listening is a producer who wants to make it easier on us and pay us and take us on, yeah, we'll DM us, slide into our DMs. 114.
I mean, we do this. We're consistent. We've got a lot to say.
I've said this on this podcast before. Consistency is not my strong suit. You have brought it into my life in a very potent, wonderful, personal growth, and sometimes wildly uncomfortable way. And I'm very grateful to you. So here we are, 114.
114.
What's the engagement?
The engagement is when you have to pee desperately and you are in the midst of New York City, what do you do?
I walk imperiously into whatever dining establishment from lowest to highest I can find. And I don't even make eye contact. I walk briskly into the restaurant as though I'm meeting someone in the back. I will nod.
Keep going.
And I just keep going. I will nod to the hostess like, yes, I know. I'm meeting a friend. And I go right into the bathroom.
As a great, great answer. All right. My sources for today.
I just want you to know, by the way, how happy I am that you're starting our back to school special with peeing. This is like,
honestly,
already,
though,
I'm so toilets, like my favorite.
Like, it's a big deal, though. If you are out in the middle of the city, and I mean,
if you didn't have the raging sense of entitlement that I do, what do you do?
What do you do?
Well, you could be like the unfortunate junkie who is frequently on my block who poops in the planter.
Oh, God.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm just saying it's an option.
Okay. I mean, full disclosure, I have absolutely peed in the street.
I peed with you in the street in Philadelphia on a Glee Club trip. And we were like on our way from a party, like from a boys' school.
Remember that.
And we were like, shit. What are we going to do? And we were crouched between two.
Something?
Yes, I guess so. Yes. When we were crouched between two cars.
That's the trick.
In the street.
Crouching between two cars.
And I remember that you were like, I was laughing and you're like, shut the fuck up. I was like, I can't.
I mean, it's better than the alternative.
Than peeing on yourself?
Yes.
Yes, I agree with you fully. Try to keep the pee out of your pants.
All right. My sources for today's story are the New York Times, the Daily News, and the New Republic.
Hey, that's a curveball from you.
Yeah, I know,
Interesting.
Right? Okay. And you'll see why. I'm excited.
I know. I'm excited. I'm giddy.
Unfold.
I'm giddy. Please.
At 5 a.m. on July 18th, 1981, Véronique de Saint-André, Susan Rojas, and Jack Henry Abbott were hanging out at a tiny cafe bar at 79 2nd Avenue at 5th Street in the East Village, and it was called Billabong. They had begun the evening at the Great Jones Bar off Bowery, right where the Sunshine Hotel used to be. Once it closed, they moved on to Berlin, not the one from After Hours, but the actual one in the East Village. And by the way, I was doing a little research on it because I was like, where have I heard of that from? Oh my God, it's from After Hours. Alex Smith, of course, Flaming Pablum, talks about this actual bar called Berlin, which the After Hours bar was named after, but was not anywhere close to where
they didn't use it as a location.
No, they did not. Okay, they just used the name. Anyway, but Susan got nervous at Berlin because the energy there felt, quote, violent. Now, she noticed that Jack Henry had a knife in his waistband. They didn't know each other that well. And so she saw that he had a knife in his waistband. That actually made her feel kind of protected. She's like, at least I'm with a guy who can protect me in this like kind of scary bar. They moved on to Billabong, this little tiny cafe bar.
Oh, I thought that's where they started.
No. They started at Great Jones Bar.
Okay.
Then they went to Berlin.
Okay.
Now they're going to Billabong at 5 a.m. So this has been an all-night affair. Their waiter at Billabong was 22-year-old Richard Adden, who was a playwright and an actor and the son-in-law of the owner of Billabong. He had married Ricci, who was also a performer, 5 months earlier, and they both worked in her parents' cafe. Richard took the graveyard shift. Just as Ricci was waking up for her day, back in their apartment, Richard called from the restaurant and told her he was finishing up. There were only 3 people left, and as soon as he finished the catch-ups, he was headed home.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Richard and Ricci?
Yeah.
How do you spell? I've never heard of a name like that. How do you spell Ricci?
Ricci.
Oh, as in like her, like the last name, like Christina Ricci.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I assume that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
So the 3 people who were there, who
were
Richard,
these 3?
Are these 3. Veronique, Susan, and Jack Henry Abbott. All right. Jack Henry got up and asked Richard where the bathroom was. Richard told him that the only bathroom was through the kitchen and the cafe didn't have accident insurance for customers, so only employees could use the bathroom. Now, Jack Henry was not happy with that, By the way, do you want to hear a little bit about the laws of bathrooms in restaurants?
Why, yes, I do.
I bet I totally knew that you would want to. So I looked it up, and
I love
actually I was a
this.
little curious too.
Yes.
Restaurants in New York City with 20 or more seats and which opened after 1977, so 1977 was the important year, must have a toilet for customers. Now, Billabong was under 20 seats. So they didn't have to have a restroom specifically for customers. But since 2022, restaurants are no longer required to open restrooms to the general public. Before 2022, they did.
Really?
Yeah.
So this whole, as we're very familiar, restrooms for customers only, we've seen those signs forever. It wasn't really enforceable until 2022. Those lying bastards.
I know.
No wonder they didn't stop me.
So Jack Henry needs to pee, wants to use the bathroom that is in the restaurant. Richard says, "I'm sorry, our insurance doesn't cover you walking through the kitchen, so you can't." Jack Henry's not happy. Richard took him outside to a dumpster on 5th Street so he could pee there. That's when Wayne Larson, who was walking past Billabong, witnessed Richard, who is much shorter than Jack Henry, make what looked like, quote, a conciliatory gesture, turn his back, and walk away. So this is a witness to what's happening over by the dumpster.
So the waiter makes a conciliatory gesture and walks away from Jack Henry Abbott, knife-wielding pee-pee man.
Exactly.
Okay.
Jack Henry lunged after him, reached over his shoulder, and stabbed Richard, quote, with such terrific velocity that the hair swung back on Jack Henry's head. That's a quote from the witness. Then he stood over Richard, Adam, and, quote, the river of blood, and taunted him, quote, very sadistically. Richard died that morning, and Jack Henry Abbott did not return to the halfway house he was staying at in the East Village, but instead fled to Louisiana. Hours later, on July 19th, the New York Times published its review of In the Belly of the Beast, unaware that its author, Jack Henry Abbott, had just committed murder. Again.
I knew this name.
And
I knew it.
Now he was on the lam. The review of the book was both glowing and measured, and underscored the story behind its very unlikely publishing. Jack Henry Abbott.
Was he Norman Mailer's boy?
Will you just hold your
I'm
roll?
sorry. I realized it was all coming back in a flood. I'm sorry.
Yes, smarty pants.
Okay, I'm sorry.
All right, we're getting there. Jack Henry Abbott was born the child of a sex worker and was shuttled between foster homes, juvenile detention centers, and reform schools. At 18, he was set loose from the juvenile detention places and then was arrested 6 months later for passing bad checks. At 21, he killed a fellow inmate. He escaped briefly and robbed a bank. Between the ages of 12 and 37, he lived free for only 9.5 months.
Wow.
He spent his life in big prisons, Leavenworth, Utah, San Quentin, and 14 years of that life were spent in the hole.
Oh, no way.
Solitary confinement.
Good gravy.
He refused to be a compliant prisoner because he felt that would mean accepting as normal the brutal treatment of the guards and the system. He would not be indoctrinated. In the meantime, Norman Mailer was writing The Executioner's Song, which at the time was called a real-life novel about Gary Gilmore, who was a convicted murderer who was given the death penalty. Incredible book, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Henry heard about the project and started writing Norman Mailer letters. Jack Henry offered to help him. He said most people who write about prison get it wrong, but he would tell Norman Mailer exactly how it is. Norman Mailer, by the way, had never met Gary Gilmore because he had been executed before Norman Mailer even started the book. So these 20-page letters describing in detail the complex and mostly hidden social dynamics of prison life were somewhat of a windfall. Norman Mailer rarely wrote back. Sometimes his secretary wrote back. But he was blown away by the facts revealed and also by the unique and forceful voice of Jack Henry. Norman Mailer's voice, epitomized in his essays and novels and interviews, was hypermasculine, aggressive, and glamorized violence and domination, his distaste for authority, homosexuality, women, and oddly contraception. He really hated contraception. Revealed itself in his writing and in his personal life. He reveled in the aggro, brutish men's movement that blossomed in the 70s. So it was no surprise that he drooled over Jack Henry Abbott's pages and pages about the exclusively male, primal, and hierarchical society created in the country's prisons. He shared the letters with his publisher, Errol MacDonald, and together they edited the handwritten pages into a book, The Belly of the Beast. Norman Mailer wrote the introduction, and Random House published it. And Norman Mailer went a step further. When Jack Henry Abbott was up for parole, he testified at his hearing that he should be released because of his unique talent. And so he was, even though one of the prison officials was quoted as saying, "Mr. Abbott is a dangerous individual. I don't see a changed man. His attitude, his demeanor indicates psychosis." And in June 1981, Jack Henry moved into the East Village halfway house.
I have so much hatred for Norman Mailer
Oh my God.
anyway,
Oh my God.
that just hearing this story makes me remember what a really epic shithead he was. And he's one of those, a disciple of Hemingway's.
Exactly.
Hemingway's.
Hemingway.
He's a wannabe Hemingway, and the, what has been revealed about Hemingway's background and how he was overcompensating for latent homosexuality and a domineering mother and all of this. I would just every guy who's like that. Like, I want a Norman Mailer expose. Well, to punch, yes. Although he would have no problem flattening me in 9 seconds.
That's true. He tried to kill one of his wives.
Yes, it's charming. But every single guy like that, if there could be just an article, an expose of this is who you really are.
I read a couple while I was researching this, and I will forward you one that I think you will appreciate.
Delightful. And also the sheer hubris, the sheer hubris of
this guy
he should be out. And but the thing about he's got such talent is that's not about really Jack Henry Abbott. That's Norman Mailer saying talent, i.e. pointing at himself, is the ticket to be above all things.
Above the law.
Yes, but the law.
Above society.
That's what I mean. Above, when I say above all things, that's really what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's so repugnant that it's like, I know you've been watching my face as I've been listening to this, and I'm getting more and more
I'm also going to send you, even though it will enrage you, an interview. He was always on Dick Cavett. Mm-hmm. And there's a great interview.
The most effete interviewer of all time.
Who honestly loved an aggro guy. I mean, Dick Cavett is fantastic.
Yeah, well, Dick Cavett, I always got the feeling that he liked to sort of poke the bear and see what the bear would do.
Let's bring on Gore Vidal. Let's bring on all these assholes and let's watch them
fight each other to the ground over literally nothing.
Right. There's one interview that I watched where Norman Mailer was being called to task by a feminist whose name I cannot recall, which...
Was it like Andrea Dworkin or someone like that? Probably.
Probably. I will put it on the Instagram if I can find it again. And he looks completely flummoxed by her points, as though a woman has no business even talking facts to him. Like he could not look at her and hear her voice and understand reason. It made you almost feel bad for him.
Well, it shows you how his narrative about himself was so vital. He was a construction, right? And so if you are a construction, you cannot let in another point of view because you're going to get toppled over in 5 seconds. And then what's left of you? Nothing.
Interesting, yeah.
And so, all of those super aggro, something to prove 70s guys, of course he couldn't even make eye contact. And it's not like Dick Cavett wasn't going to listen to her, right?
Right.
So he couldn't just pummel her to the ground.
No, but yeah, there's a look on his face like, you speak English? Not much. I do not understand words that come from you.
Who is this chimp in a wig and a dress? What is happening?
And what I remember, what she was saying is, you're being really condescending to me, and it's insulting. He was like, what? How can I condescend to a woman? And that doesn't even make sense. All right, back to the story. So Jack Henry Abbott, he's at this halfway house for a matter of months before he decides to go and kill this poor waiter who works down the street. After the murder, he fled to Louisiana, but was soon recognized and sent back to New York. At his trial, he talked a lot about the abuses of prison life and their effects on him. He talked about the isolation cells, torture, beatings, drugs. It really wasn't very good, to be honest.
I have a lifelong
reform.
I have a lifelong goal to never be in prison, knock wood.
But yeah, I mean, especially in those days, this was before anyone was even really talking about going in and fixing.
No, it was
on.
Lawless insanity.
He claimed he misunderstood when Richard asked him to, quote, step outside. He thought it was a challenge rather than an offering of an option to pee at the dumpster. Norman Mailer attended the trial, as did Christopher Walken and Susan Sarandon and Jerzy Kaczynski, all fans of In the Belly of the Beast. Mailer held a press conference to advocate for a lenient sentence. Dude, haven't you done enough?
He's a murderer.
This is what Norman Mailer said. Adden has already been destroyed. At least let Abbott become a writer. Culture is worth a little risk.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Jack Henry Abbott was ultimately convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years to life. He was denied parole, though, in 2001 and hanged himself in his prison cell in 2002. Richie Adden sued Abbott for $7.5 million and won, which ultimately meant she received all his income from the sales of the book. I have 3 quotes to close out this story.
Okay.
This is from the review of In the Belly of the Beast. This remarkable book, unfortunately, will almost certainly allow further indulgence in one of our most inveterate fantasies. Americans have so long and deeply romanticized the loner, the outlaw, the truly tough man, that even when the humdrum horror of such lives is made clear, a residual glamour remains.
I love that. Who wrote that?
I don't know who wrote that review, but that was in the Times.
That's a wonderful quote.
All right, this is a quote from In the Belly of the Beast. We have no legal rights as prisoners, only as citizens. The only rights we have are those left to their discretion. So we assert our rights the only way we can. It is a compromise, and in the end, I greatly fear we as prisoners will lose, but the loss will be society's loss. We are only a few steps removed from society. After us come you.
Chilling.
And this is a quote Jack Henry Abbott actually did an interview with A Current Affair.
Get out of town.
He did. And this is what he had to say. Remorse implies you did something wrong. There was no pain. It was a clean wound.
Interestingly, my first flood of rage at that was at Mailer. It was already known that this was a psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
That's the statement of a psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is pretty consistent. Yes, cuckoo is as cuckoo does.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy. And fuck Norman Mailer.
Yeah. I mean, that guy, actually, Jack Henry Abbott, really did not have a chance in life. You can't be incarcerated in a really, like, fucked up prison system for, like, what is it, 95% of your life and be expected to come out without any I mean, that was kind of the point of In the Belly of the Beast. It's like, nobody's reforming us here, guys. Like,
agreed, but
it is Lord of the Flies.
The question is, at what point in his life, and I do not, this is a genuine question. At what point in his life did he get out of the foster care system, and how long did it take to get him to go to prison? Did you already say that? And I just can't recall.
It was a matter of months. He was in the foster care system. He went to, the first time he was detained was when he was 12.
That was juvie. That wasn't foster.
Right. He was in foster care when he went into juvie at the age of 12.
Yes. Well, it's true that you can't thrive in that environment, and that it is,
or if you do,
it's a dead end.
It is pretty remarkable, but especially I think in this period of time when there were absolutely, like, nobody was even looking at the prison system.
I agree. The only thing that I was going to say, there are two things I was going to say. The first is, this was a person who was also mentally ill from the get-go. So when you have someone whose brain chemistry is not right, and then you put them in a terrible situation, yeah, there's no hope. However, I have had the great and good fortune of meeting a man named Mark Goldsmith, who is in his mid-80s. And when he retired, he was a Madison Avenue advertising man of the Mad Men era.
Yeah.
And when he retired, his wife, who is also, she is amazing. She started and built and then ran an extraordinarily successful nonprofit that is still thriving to help children at risk. She said, "Why don't you volunteer?" And he decided to teach. And his assignment was to Rikers. He did his one day, and then he was told, "Don't worry, you don't have to go back." And he's like, "Oh, I'm going back." Cut to a couple of years later, he starts his own nonprofit, Getting Out, Staying Out. 80% of the people in his program got out of prison, stayed out of prison, built their own businesses.
Amazing. Because
he taught them, get a load of this, that everything that they had done that was illegal, that landed them in prison, they were all business skills. Most of them were drug dealers. He was like, "All right, let me explain to you how a corporation works." And he did, like, the whole org chart, what the CEO does with this. And he just said, "Does this look familiar?" And they were like, "That's exactly what we do." And he was like, "Yeah.
Yeah, just sell something different."
Yeah. So
don't do the drug
They got their degrees in school, in prison. Some of them got MBAs, and then they all started their own businesses. And Mark is now trying to pass the torch of social entrepreneurship and teaching people how to do what he did.
That's amazing. I will definitely post about that on Instagram. That sounds incredible.
It's
so smart, so intuitive.
It is. He wrote a book. I think it needs a better title, but it's From Madison Avenue to Rikers. And it makes it sound like he went to Rikers. And I was like, no. But it's available on Amazon, and he, like, let's post it, because what he did is, to my mind, the next wave of how you get farther and farther away from what Jack Henry Abbott's no-win situation, forget that he was a psychotic, but that scenario, no-win was.
Awesome.
So,
Yes?
I have an engagement question for you.
Okay, I'm opening my mind to be engaged.
As you may or may not know, Friday marks the beginning of New York Fashion Week.
Oh, I did hear that.
Have you ever been to a fashion show?
I have not.
Me neither. I guess we're not fashionistas.
What the hell's with that? Where are
Well,
the invites?
I'll tell you what's up with that.
Okay.
While we like to look good, we're not going to really suffer for fashion. We're not those people,
Fair.
right?
Yeah.
Should anyone suffer for fashion?
I mean, yeah. I'm glad others take on that burden.
Well, agreed. But there was a fashion designer, a young designer in 1975, who said no one should suffer for fashion.
Ooh, who said that?
Sandra Garratt,
Okay.
not Mrs. Garrett.
I didn't think that for a second.
I didn't even think about it until this second. I've been reading her name over and over, and I was like, Mrs. Garrett. So you and I have had a conversation, I think more than once on this podcast, saying, was that stretchy clothing called units or multiples? Do you recall this conversation?
No. Units or multiples?
So do you remember we talked about this? It was the stretchy clothing and it was all different tubes and you could like put it on like a skirt or a cowl or a hood.
Never talked about this. You are confusing me with another podcast person.
Yes, I'm cheating on you with another podcast. I forgot to tell you.
I do know what you're talking about, but I swear to God, we have never talked about it.
Well, then we're gonna.
Great.
Ready?
I totally know what you're talking about.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
So the reason I say not suffer is that this clothing line that I'm about to talk about was super comfortable. And among the super comfortable things about it, not a single button, zipper, fastening, closure, nothing. So let's take a little trip back in time to 1975, when in Los Angeles, a young fashion design student named Sandra Garratt did her senior project. And it was different stretchy pieces of fabric that it was up to the wearer to put together in a way that was an expression of her own look.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, it is just a tube, correct?
Well, that's what it became. So actually, there were also like sashes and scarves.
Oh, right. So you could accessorize the tube.
Exactly. All right. So in 1975, she created the project was called Baseline Modular Collection.
All right.
She then goes to New York City, which she thinks is going to be a stopover before she goes off to London. But in New York City, she meets a dashing young, surprisingly heterosexual man named Michael working for Halston. They get married. Ooh, she stays in New York. And in 1978, her line that has now been made into units is picked up by Henri Bendel.
Oh.
So we've talked about Bendel on this podcast before.
Yes, we certainly have.
And it was, it did two things. It was very high fashion and also cutting edge fashion. So she fit into the latter category. And units, when it first came out, was brilliant because it was packaged for the people. Each thing was one size fits most. And it was a series of tubes in different colors and also some tunics, some of these like sash type things, and some leggings.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds incredibly comfortable. It also sounds like Target as opposed to Bendel's.
Well, it was cutting edge. And what she did was she packaged every piece in like a plastic bag with not a photograph, but a piece of paper in the front that showed the model wearing that one piece. And they were displayed on pegboards.
I love it.
So it was like hyper industrial. So remember, this is 1978, high design. This is the same time that modular architecture and modular furniture was breaking. And she had never seen, and I'm quoting her, modular clothing. And that was the idea. So it really takes off, and it's taken like I believe there's 600 different outlets that carry it. So the outlet is not just the store, it's JCPenney. It's Bendel, it's whatever, and definitely Bloomingdale's.
All right.
It goes every place. And what was really brilliant about it, so her tagline was heightened individuality through apparent uniformity. And the idea was, and I love this also, and it couldn't be more 80s, is that her clothing was a canvas. And then you were going to bring whatever your individuality was to put on the canvas. So imagine, and the tubes, they all started off as black.
Okay, that was my next question. I need to know the colors.
But then it branched out into 20 different colors. So it was 50 pieces.
Okay.
So a tube could be 4 inches long, 8 inches long,
all right,
20 inches long, 4 feet. So each one of those was an SKU number.
All right.
And so there were 50 of those, and they came in 20 different colors. So you could really start to, as the line grew.
They primary colors? Were they bright?
They were bright. They were pastel. They were black. They were white. They were striped.
Oh.
She went all out, but it was she stuck to the modular idea.
Okay.
50 pieces, 20 colors. If anything new was introduced, something else went out. It was that.
All right.
And it was always displayed this same way in plastic packaging. Now, one of the articles that I read about this made a really good point, which was the 80s was the era of hair. The bigger the hair, the more elaborate the hair. And I know that we've all seen on, social media, these hilarious, like terrifying high school photos where it's like, how did you get your bangs to do that?
Straight up in the air.
Exactly. And why? There's like the waterfall, like it went up and then like down on the side. So it was also kind of perfect, because imagine you're working so hard on your hair and your 19 million like Madonna rubber band bracelets and all of the accessories that we've talked about on this podcast, like the silver Lang Lang earrings and the puffy hearts and all.
Keep it simple and just wear a tube.
A tube is your friend. Now, keep in mind that this idea took off in ways that were not attributed to her. Can you think of something from the 80s where women were wearing black, stretchy, short dresses? Might you be?
Video.
Yes.
Robert Palmer video.
Yes. The Addicted to Love video.
Yeah. Now that you say it, I did spend quite a bit of money on a black, stretchy tube skirt that I tried to make work for quite a while until I just had to say, this is not for me. It is not for me.
Not everything is for us. Although hilariously, I have in my closet, I do not know when I bought it, I have a black spandex, stretchy, short-ish skirt with a wide waistband, which would have been right in keeping with this. But now we're going to have an intersection of then and now. Now, there is a phrase that has rankled me. Oh, me annoyed? What a surprise. Been rankling me since I first heard it. It must have been a year ago. Are you familiar with the phrase quiet luxury?
Recently aware of that phrase. I think I would even say within the last couple months.
How did you come across it?
It was annoyingly in a character description for an audition.
Okay, so that only raises my dander further. So because it's mainstream. So here's where that began. Okay, so we, as you well know, have been living in a Kardashian world. We've been living in
not quiet luxury.
No,
I assume.
No. Kanye going out with his naked wife, not quiet luxury. That poor woman. The glitz, like everything has been so manufactured looking and over the top, and Balenciaga,
right,
branding everywhere. So that show, Succession, I guess it was now like 2 years ago, one of the characters was wearing a plain black baseball hat. Turns out that plain black cashmere baseball hat became the epicenter of this concept of quiet luxury. If you know, you know.
Okay.
That Loro Piana baseball hat cost like $1,000. And by the way, anyone who buys that is a total prick. So, but people started to recognize, and these are people who have grown up in the Kardashian world, right? But they don't know that that's called good taste.
Right. I was going to say, now that you describe the black baseball cap as being cashmere, I'm like, that's kind of pukey.
It's totally pukey.
But I do respect the look.
Yes.
It's a good look.
It's unlabeled.
That's
the thing. That's the whole thing, is that if you're not a walking billboard,
else's name on me, I find it so.
Never in my life have I worn knowingly a label to show the label.
Right.
And we didn't grow up in a world, back to the 80s, folks. We grew up in a world where if you showed the label, you were pukey.
Yeah, it was a little gauche.
It was gauche. It was nouveau riche. It was just embarrassing. Like, why would you do that?
And now all the
except the one thing, Benetton,
right,
on those sweaters.
Benetton, and
Ralph Lauren, and
Izod. When you saw an Izod, you knew a Polo when you saw a Polo. But that's still a little subtle. It's not like wearing those like
the G
or the two C's.
Yeah. Or Louis Vuitton, or like all of these things.
Yes.
Or I almost threw up when I was in Florida a couple of months ago. Very, very fancy condo with my friend, and this woman was wearing an oversized, looked like a men's, like Oxford shirt at the pool as her cover up. And my friend turned to me and rolled her eyes and said, "That's $3,000.
How did she know?
It was Balenciaga. Because once she turned around, that woman, it was just you could go to Brooks Brothers, get a fat man's shirt, and it just had Balenciaga across the shoulders.
Oh, so it said it.
Across the back.
That's ridiculous.
$3,000. So anyway, quiet luxury is the antithesis. In our lifetimes to date, that's just been called good taste and having style. Yes, style over branding, I guess.
Right.
So this woman who we're speaking of, Sandra Garratt, Sandra Garratt, she actually, tube dress lady, the simplicity that she was dedicated to, she also came to it because she worked for a designer who I know you have never heard of. His name, he went by a single name, Zoran.
Zoran, right. I do not know that man.
Was, and still is to some degree, was a designer whose clothing was in places like Bendel, Charivari, but he did a lot of not off the rack, like private stuff. It was about cut and it was about fabric and utter simplicity. And he was the ultimate, if you know, you know. He wound up never having a storefront. He was always under the radar with a dedicated clientele that would follow him wherever. And he also worked out of Palm Beach, which is, I think, where he is now.
Huh.
But that idea of simplicity is your baseline, is part of where he came from. And so I did a little bit of a deep dive into him. He's a fascinating character. I believe he's Israeli, and he's so surly that I was like, I want him now to fight Norman Mailer, even though Norman Mailer's dead. But Norman Mailer wouldn't have stood a chance against Zoran. Don't mess with the Zoran. And he had hired her for concept collection vision. And eventually, their two brains together, just from being in one another's orbit, she went from units to multiples.
Okay, what's multiples?
The reason that she called it multiples, it's the exact same thing, is because J.C. Penney, with whom she had been doing business, tried to do a hostile takeover of her brand.
Ooh.
And eventually she won.
Okay.
And she sold units, that concept, to JCPenney to avoid a hostile takeover. But a judge determined that the non-compete that they wanted her to have to deal with was unconstitutional. So she walked right back around and did exactly what she had been doing under a new name, which was multiples. And here's the description. They were both prepackaged concepts. Both were made from our mono fabric of choice, a high-quality USA-made 50/50 cotton poly interlock knit. The patterns were identical. The identifiable construction remained the same, with modular cut and construction, arm vents, zigzag flat-felled seams, and one-size-fits-most sizing. While making the change, however, Garratt scaled back on options. Units had nearly 50 style variations. Multiples had 22 styles. But where units had been in 600 outlets, multiples was in 1,200 freestanding stores across the United States.
Wow.
So Sandra won.
What year is this?
That took place in 1985.
Okay.
So units had been capped. Its revenue at $150 million. Multiples brought that number up to $500 million in sales, with an additional $150 million from her kids' collection that was plugged by Sesame Street. So wholesome. She did activewear, menswear, and finally delved into accessories. The New York Times went crazy for her, not only for the clothing, but for who she was in the concept, saying it's not style, it's concept, which I thought was very cool.
Very interesting.
She said that part of what kept her interested in the idea of what she was doing was that she loved Legos and color forms. So she would see her children playing with these modular, colorful, it's up to you to how you're going to put it together.
And so creative.
Exactly. And so that's what it was all about, and about having an active lifestyle. There were a couple of other people who she was inspired by in New York City. Another one of them, who I have not found this person yet, but she talks about a young designer named Julio who was on Lexington Avenue. So to be found shortly. She insisted that all of the construction, all of the sewing, all of the manufacturing was done in the United States, saying the third world does not exist to be exploited as a cheap labor pool. So this is in 1988.
Amazing.
She's been celebrated for her business model and even honored at a reception at the UN. She is the recipient of multiple VMSD awards for her packaging concepts and designs. Today, she is offering a new version of multiples, which we should now track down, called SGD, so Sandra Garratt Design Box. So each box is a different concept. So you've got the luxury box, the mod box. I haven't seen them out. Let's see if we can find them. she even has, and this is how I found this whole thing, private clients, because I found a lot of the information about her on the New York Times and in Gothamist, but I also found on Reddit, someone was talking about how much they love multiples, and they tracked her down in Florida, and she made them their own line, their own collection.
Oh my God.
Of units/multiples.
That's crazy. I mean, I'm sorry. When you talked about how much money her company was worth, the first thing that came into my head was, what does her apartment look like?
I know. I modular. I'm thinking all that Roche Beaubois furniture. So she seems like she was an extraordinarily cool woman. She also insisted on only using eco-friendly cotton. Again, well before her time.
Wow.
So
Susan Garratt.
Sandra Garratt. So fashion pioneer, 80s, creator of the 80s stretchy black fabric blueprint, the number of stretchy black little tiny dresses that were zooming around Kenyon College when I arrived in 1987, you wouldn't believe. I had a friend, Kathy, it's all she wore. And she was a very little tiny person. It was like, you know, when you go into like a child's bedroom and there are these little tiny hangers and all of the clothing is like 3 inches down from the hanger. That's it. That was Kathy's entire wardrobe. It was like 4 inches from the shoulder or the waistband down, spandex. So anyway, she seems like she was an incredible and is an incredible woman, and to be continued.
Amazing. Yay! We still got it.
We're back. Ha-cha-cha.
Like riding a bike.
It just is amazing how our learning curve, isn't it amazing that we just do this so naturally now? Do you remember at the very beginning?
I do. Still some of my favorite episodes, to be honest. But oh, no. There's an ease to it now. It's one of those, 100,000 hour things. What is?
Yes, 10,000 hours and you become
10,
an expert.
It feels like 100,000, but 10,000 hours.
Well, also that we have
actually good at something.
Well, and that we have our entire studio in a gym bag.
Right.
It's pretty phenomenal.
And you know how many people have said, like, when are you guys coming back? You're not going anywhere, are you? Where are you?
I don't know. Has it been a lot?
It's been.
Should I feel popular?
Quite a few people are saying that they are eager for this.
Well, we are back, and it's so exciting to be back with a little bit of time and space to have new perspectives, new ideas.
Perfect.
And let's see what this season has in store for us.
Happy fall.
Happy fall.